In less than 60 seconds, everything Camilla had spent 30 years building completely unraveled in a single hallway. It was not a shouting match. It was not a leaked tabloid scandal or a public screaming fit. It was a single devastating visual checkmate executed in total silence inside Windsor Castle. She walked into the Hall of Matriarchs expecting to survey her own curated version of history, only to freeze completely mid-stride. They pulled from the dark, dusty storage room where she had personally banished it decades ago was Princess Diana's official portrait. And it was not just hung anywhere, it was placed flawlessly, unapologetically right beside Queen Elizabeth. What Camilla realized in that agonizing, breathless silence is exactly what this video will unpack the covert alliance between Prince William and Princess Anne. The surgical weaponization of palace protocol and the devastating realization that despite the crown sitting on her head, Camilla actually controls absolutely nothing. To understand why this precise moment shattered her so completely, you have to understand the staggering illusion of absolute power she had constructed for herself. For decades, Camilla operated not just as Charles's shadow, but as the meticulous, ruthless architect of Diana's institutional erasure. This is a woman who did not simply move into Diana's former rooms after her tragic death in Paris. She systematically purged them of the late princess's existence. The forensic details of her takeover are chilling. She ordered Diana's fresh flowers to be physically carried out and burned. She permanently locked the bedroom where a grieving mother once held her young boy, sealing it off like a crime scene. And when it came to a masterpiece painting that captured Diana at the absolute peak of her warmth and beauty, a portrait intended for the sacred walls of Windsor, Camilla intercepted it. She dragged it into a windowless storage closet, humiliating any staff member who dared to offer help, and shut the door with a satisfied smile. She believed she had won. During the darkest days of the 1980s and 90s, while Diana was being consumed alive by the machinery of the monarchy battling bulimia, extreme isolation, and a deeply hostile press, Camilla sat comfortably at her sprawling Wiltshire estate. She read the brutal tabloid headlines over her morning tea. She allegedly read pieces detailing Diana's physical shrinking and emotional fragility out loud to her aristocratic friends, laughing at the systematic destruction of a young woman they viewed as utterly out of place. Camilla had the cruel nicknames. She had the inner circle. She had Charles entirely under her thumb, treating him as her ultimate shield. By the time the 2023 coronation concluded, Camilla believed the metamorphosis was complete. The board was cleared. She was the queen. But what she fundamentally misunderstood was the nature of the people she had stepped on to reach the throne. William was only 15 years old when he walked behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London. He already knew about the secret phone calls, the manipulation, and the psychological torment his mother endured. But William did not scream. He did not act out recklessly. He watched Camilla march through his mother's rooms, taking down photographs and rewriting history. And he absorbed that profound grief, turning it into something infinitely more dangerous. He turned it into patience. For over 20 years, William quietly and ruthlessly studied the labyrinth of palace bylaws, curator protocols, and the archaic legalities of royal residences. He knew that to strike back at Camilla, he could not use emotion. He had to use the institution itself. He sat in private meetings with heritage experts. He traced the historical records of portrait placements dating back decades. He did not just want to hang a painting, he needed to execute a maneuver so administratively flawless, so legally ironclad that no royal lawyer, no senior aide, and certainly not Camilla could ever touch it afterward. He was laying an administrative trap waiting for the exact right moment to snap it shut. And he was not acting alone. If William was the architect of this reckoning, Princess Anne was the enforcer. You have to understand that Anne's wound predated Diana's by a full generation. Her history with Camilla is a 50-year Cold War. Long before Camilla destroyed Charles and Diana's marriage, she had intercepted Andrew Parker Bowles, the man Princess Anne was deeply in love with and had hoped to marry. Because of strict royal protocols of the era, Anne was forced to step aside. She put on her formal clothes. In 1973, sat in the church pews with her face perfectly still, and watched Camilla walk down the aisle toward the man she loved. Anne converted that humiliation into something cold, hard, and permanent. She watched Camilla operate as a secret mistress, grind Diana down to nothing, and eventually place a crown on her own head. So when William sat alone in his private study and made one phone call to his aunt, saying simply, "She comes home tomorrow," Anne did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. She replied, "I cannot wait to see the look on her face. It is long overdue." The execution of the plan was a masterpiece of institutional retaliation. On the morning of the operation, William's office deployed a textbook distraction. They arranged a mandatory public engagement for Camilla far outside of London. It looked like a routine calendar event, but it was in reality a carefully orchestrated exile designed solely to get her out of the building. The moment her convoy cleared the Windsor gates, the trap was sprung. The Hall of Matriarchs was entirely sealed off. No press releases were drafted. No daily diary entries were logged. Total suffocating silence. Only a tiny handful of heavily vetted staff members were allowed inside. In the early evening, the portrait of Princess Diana was carried out of the dark. The staff moved slowly, carrying the heavy wrapped canvas with the reverence reserved for something deeply wounded that finally deserved gentleness. Princess Anne was already waiting in the room. She had insisted on supervising this herself. As the protective linen was pulled back and the tissue paper lifted, Diana's face caught the light for the first time in a quarter of a century. The air in the gallery fundamentally shifted. The silence was heavy. Anne stepped forward, placed a single firm hand on the heavy gold frame and straightened it against the wall. Diana belongs here, Anne said quietly, her voice carrying 50 years of restrained justice. She always did. Within 90 minutes, the operation was complete. Diana, Princess of Wales, was cemented onto the most honoured wall in the royal residence side by side with the late Queen Elizabeth. The two women who gave the modern British monarchy its emotional heart were finally together. That evening, Camilla returned from her engagement in London. She climbed into bed, entirely unaware that the ghost she had spent half her life trying to bury was now standing watch just down the hall. The illusion of her total control was still intact in her mind as she slept. The next morning, the trap finally snapped shut. Camilla walked casually down the corridor, unhurried and confident. Then she looked up. Her eyes hit the wall and her body physically stopped. Staff members nearby heard a sound escape her throat that they had never heard before, a sharp, raw sound of total panic, the screeching halt of a 30-year reign of psychological terror. She immediately began barking orders. She demanded the portrait be taken down immediately. The staff, operating under William's airtight legal directives, simply looked at her and said no. Frantic, she demanded an emergency face-to-face meeting with William. The answer from his office was a flat, unyielding no. Every door she tried to open was suddenly locked. Every administrative lever she tried to pull had been disconnected. Cornered, humiliated, and realizing for the first time that her power was entirely synthetic, Camilla turned to the one strategy she had relied on for 3 decades. She stormed into Charles's private office. She stood in front of the King of England, her ultimate shield, and demanded he use his absolute power to fix it. She demanded he be the man who had always protected her, the man who had broken his own family for her sake. She waited for him to make the call and tear Diana off that wall. Charles sat behind his heavy mahogany desk. For 30 years, this was the man who had burned down his own public image, defied his mother, and fractured the monarchy just to keep Camilla happy. He had always been her ultimate safety net. But as she stood there breathless and furious, demanding that he strip Diana from the wall of his ancestors, Charles did something he had never done before. He looked at her and he did nothing. He did not pick up the telephone. He did not summon the palace curators. He did not rage at his son. The silence in that office was heavy and suffocating. It was the silence of a king who finally understood the checkmate his heir had just executed. William had not broken a single rule. He had weaponized the heritage guidelines so flawlessly that for Charles to undo it, he would have to publicly disrespect the historical preservation of the crown itself. But the refusal ran deeper than just administrative protocol. In that crushing silence, Camilla realized Charles was exhausted. The era of him fighting his own bloodline to appease her insecurities was over. He was choosing his son. He was choosing the survival of the institution. And for the very first time in their intertwined history, he was leaving her completely undefended. Just then, the heavy oak doors opened and Princess Anne walked in. She did not raise her voice. She did not offer a polite greeting. She simply looked at Camilla with the absolute stillness of a woman who had waited half a century for this exact moment. Anne did not rush a single second of it. She took in the panic in Camilla's eyes, the frantic realization of defeat, and then delivered 5 words that effectively ended the 50-year war. It is what Diana deserved. Anne did not wait for a response, nor did she need one. She turned and walked out, leaving Camilla utterly alone in the chilling silence of her own making. This was never really just about a piece of canvas on a wall. The panic that seized Camilla that morning was rooted in a much darker, much colder reality. It was the sudden, violent realization of her own commercial desperation. For decades, she had operated under the illusion of absolute power, confusing Charles's endless indulgence with actual institutional authority. She believed the crown on her head meant she owned the kingdom, but the portrait was a physical, unavoidable manifestation of a terrifying truth: she actually owns nothing. The moment the crown passed from Queen Elizabeth to Charles, the financial and territorial bedrock of the royal family shifted directly to Prince William. William controls the Duchy of Cornwall. This is not a ceremonial title. It is a staggering billion-dollar real estate empire. He controls the vast agricultural estates, the lucrative commercial properties, and the private wealth that sustains the working family. The sprawling homes Camilla enjoys, the vehicles she uses, the very operational budgets of the staff she attempts to command, all of it flows through a financial structure that William now oversees. She does not sign the payroll for the curators who just refused her orders. Her entire existence, her lavish lifestyle, and her future security are entirely dependent on the grace of the very institution she spent decades trying to bend to her will. This is the essence of her commercial desperation. For years, she operated with the confidence of a billionaire, but she was merely spending Charles's capital. Now she is face to face with the reality that she is in institutional terms entirely broke. When Charles is eventually gone, Camilla will be stripped of her primary shield. She will hold no constitutional power, no sovereign authority, and no financial independence. She will be a tenant of the crown, existing entirely at the pleasure of King William. The portrait returning to the wall was not an emotional outburst. It was William's silent, devastating message: I hold the keys now. I own the walls, and your time of rewriting history is officially over. As Camilla's artificial empire crumbles, a new order has quietly taken its place. Led by the very woman Camilla tried so hard to overshadow, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, has achieved everything Camilla never could, and she did it without a single drop of manipulation. The contrast is staggering. While Camilla relied on secret alliances, leaked tabloid stories, and the systematic destruction of a rival to build her profile, Catherine embraced uncomplaining sacrifice and flawless dedication to duty. Catherine represents the moral centre of the modern monarchy. She holds the unbreakable affection of the British public and the fierce, uncompromising protection of William. Catherine does not need to hide portraits in dusty storage rooms to feel secure in her position. She does not need to demand loyalty because she commands respect. Her power is legitimate, rooted in her character, her quiet endurance, and her undeniable connection to the legacy of Diana. Every time Catherine wears Diana's sapphire ring, it is a quiet reminder that the bloodline of the future, king, belongs to the woman Camilla tried to erase. Every subtle shift inside the palace walls now points to this exact new reality. The restoration of Diana's painting is merely the first visible fracture in Camilla's carefully curated world. What looks like a routine protocol update regarding art curation is actually the systematic dismantling of her influence. That detail matters. The staff knows it, the courtiers know it. The locked doors of Diana's old rooms will eventually be unsealed. The erased history is actively being rewritten back into the archives, and Camilla is being forced to watch it happen in real time, financially and administratively, powerless to stop a single second of it. She played a 30-year game of chess, sacrificing anyone who stood in her way, convinced that the ultimate prize was the title of queen. But what she failed to understand is that titles are just words on paper. True power inside the British monarchy is not given by a ring or a crown. It is held by blood, by history, and by the relentless, quiet machinery of the institution itself. William outplayed her not by screaming, not by leaking stories to the press, but by mastering the very system she tried to use against his mother. Diana is finally back where she belongs, taking her rightful place in the light side by side with the matriarchs of history. Her eyes look out over the corridors of Windsor, a permanent fixture that cannot be moved, ignored, or forgotten. And the woman who tried so desperately to keep her in the dark is finally learning the most devastating lesson of all: you can steal a crown, you can occupy a palace, but you can never ever conquer a legacy. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown of the royal power dynamics insightful, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below.